Y los estudios del diseño analizan, investigan y profundizan las distintas aproximaciones que tiene.
Yo pienso que la discusión entre una escuela técnica y una escuela creativa es lo que hace distintiva a Centro.
Es una institución que genera pasión y de la que se apasiona uno. Me parece que es fundamental introducirse en una comunidad que va a sacar lo mejor de ustedes y que ustedes pueden sacar lo mejor de esa gran comunidad. Es la única escuela en la que se van a estar discutiendo temas y problemas que hoy en día otras escuelas no están pensando. Quizás ustedes sean la primera generación en la que transformen más de lo que construyen, que reciclen más de lo que hacen. Y eso requiere otro marco conceptual, otras herramientas, y esta es la escuela donde lo estamos viendo.
Yo pienso que la discusión entre una escuela técnica y una escuela creativa es lo que hace distintiva a Centro.
Es una institución que genera pasión y de la que se apasiona uno. Me parece que es fundamental introducirse en una comunidad que va a sacar lo mejor de ustedes y que ustedes pueden sacar lo mejor de esa gran comunidad. Es la única escuela en la que se van a estar discutiendo temas y problemas que hoy en día otras escuelas no están pensando. Quizás ustedes sean la primera generación en la que transformen más de lo que construyen, que reciclen más de lo que hacen. Y eso requiere otro marco conceptual, otras herramientas, y esta es la escuela donde lo estamos viendo.
pienso que la discusión entre una escuela técnica y una escuela creativa es lo que hace distintiva a CENTRO.
Es una institución que genera pasión y de la que se apasiona uno. Me parece que es fundamental introducirse en una comunidad que va a sacar lo mejor de ustedes y que ustedes pueden sacar lo mejor de esa gran comunidad. Es la única escuela en la que se van a estar discutiendo temas y problemas que hoy en día otras escuelas no están pensando. Quizás ustedes sean la primera generación en la que transformen más de lo que construyen, que reciclen más de lo que hacen. Y eso requiere otro marco conceptual, otras herramientas, y esta es la escuela donde lo estamos viendo.
Buenas tardes, bienvenidos todos, very welcome. We are planning to have a talk with Bas Princen, but also we are together for the people that are visiting us. A part of our students of CENTRO, from interior design, from urban design, from cinema, and housing as well, and also from the head university from Genève in Switzerland. So welcome you too. And well, basically the idea is to have now the talk by Bas Princen. He's a great photographer, Dutch photographer, who is also involved teaching with these guys in HED in Genève. So we welcome also the team who organized the teachers of HED. Thank you for coming, and it's a great opportunity to share ideas, time, and a lot of Barragan images. So, Bas, up to you.
So, thank you for coming, and let's start. So I'm a photographer, artist, but I'm graduated as a designer for public space, and as an architect, but not as an engineer. But now I only photograph. I always start with a picture of my studio, because it's important that you know where the works are being made. So it's a very big studio. Can I have the full screen without us? So I live close to Zurich, so in Switzerland. My studio is still in Holland because I lived there most of my life. I worked there most of my life. When I come to the studio, I understand again how big works are. I can test in the studio work that have a size, that have a materiality, that can be hung on the wall, and that can almost be shown in a museum context because it's the same scale. Here's another moment, so I sometimes take pictures in different moments. The studio is here. It's in Rotterdam in the harbor. This is my studio. We have always visitors of, in this case, some Russian oligarch. But recently we have now a big old cruise liner in which Ukrainian refugees are being housed. So it's a very particular part of the city, very much contemporary. So I like very, very much to be there because it also puts the work in a context, and you can, well, you're part of reality. I started out as a photographer when I was studying design for public space, and I made proposals on how you could use a space. So my photographs were not documents. I declared them possible spaces of use. No? Here you have a sand quarry at the sea of Holland. And these people, they go there because there are 5 different types of sand, so they can be stuck. They like to be stuck. It's not only that I was interested in these spaces, but it also has a relation to, let's say, Dutch landscape painting, of course. Later, I started photographing cities. This is a part of a book called Five Cities. There are 5 cities in the Middle East. Can we go back to the... this is the announcement of a city. Announcement in the sense, it's the title of the work is former sugarcane field, and it means that the family owned the plot the size of the block. They used to be farmers. It's in Cairo. And they built with the family money a tower as high as possible. This is about the maximum they can go with the technology that they have. And they occupy 3-4 floors because there's, of course, no elevator inside, and the rest they rent out. Now you would say, where are the windows? The windows are on the other side, because they anticipate that the neighbor will do exactly the same, and the neighbor on this side will do exactly the same. So it's the anticipation of the city, you could say. Here we have a water cooling plant in Dubai, and another kind of a finished part of the city. Here you see how the works are displayed, in this case in the Barragan, London. After the series Reservoir, this is a work called, what is the title? It's Future Olympic Park. It's in Beijing, a few months before the Olympics would take place. And this is the sand that they store where they will make the landscape around the Olympic Stadium. But I liked very much that you almost cannot see anymore whether it's artificial, whether it's man-made, whether it's natural. And there are a couple more images from that series. There's a gold mine in Suriname. That's the book. Then we moved with the family to Singapore for 5 years. And while living in Singapore, I was making things like this. This is the extension of Singapore. This is the extension of Singapore airport. This is Tekong, which is a military site. And it reminded me a little bit of Holland. And somehow, when I was there, I started to understand that maybe it's not necessary anymore to photograph cities, because cities will take care of themselves. And I understand photography as something that could project a future, or that could show you a way. Singapore is a very modern city. There is no history. There is also no interest in history. So I will start now with the first work that is maybe related to this idea of a kind of appropriation of something that is either architecture or something historically important. I was asked by the team of Rem Koolhaas for the Venice Biennial in 2014 to pose a work on Italy, because they were doing a big show called Monditalia in the Arsenale, to display all problematics of the world seen through Italian eyes. So they said all the problems in the world, all the interesting things are in a kind of a micro way also visible in Italy. And they asked me, they wrote me an email and they said, would you propose something? And then we will decide whether you're invited or not. And we like you to photograph contemporary architecture. And I was thinking, I was sitting in Singapore in our kind of a new city, and I thought, I don't want to photograph cities anymore. I don't want to deal with contemporary modernity. I want to deal with history. But how do I do that? I don't know. Then I proposed, because I remembered something, and I proposed a work called Room of Peace. And the Room of Peace is an actual room, is a Renaissance room in Siena. It's all painted, so there is no relief. and it's in the Palazzo Pubblico. And it functioned, it's a room where 9 people who were chosen from the city to govern the city. They were supposed to be there for an amount of months, live in that space and make the decisions of the city. Now, you see here a fresco in the top. This is the city of Siena. This is the countryside. It's also the first depiction of a city and a landscape which is united. Before that, it was either a landscape was important or city was important. But that's not the most interesting part. Oh, what happened? The most interesting part is that it's a mirror. On one side, you have a painting of the so-called outcome of good governance. So when you govern the city well. On the other side, you have the outcome of bad governance or war or tyranny. So they mirrored the fresco on the other side. And the people who were making the decisions of the city were sitting, not on these chairs because it's not, but they were sitting underneath good governance, looking at bad governance. So they had an image in front of them that was explaining them that the fate of the city or of their territory was in their hands. And I thought this was a fascinating story. And I thought, can you appropriate that? Can you make a new work out of that? And I didn't know because I never did before. But in the end, I decided to make, well, when I proposed the works, they were very happy. They said, fantastic, we put it in the first room of Arsenale. The first thing where everyone comes in will be that. So I decided to make 8 works, quite big, and I decided to make them almost as copies of the fresco. So to appropriate them, to make copies as close as the reality. Of each side, there is a detail. So this is bad governance, this is good governance. Here you see justice cutting the head of someone. There are the gates. So this is the gate from the city to the countryside, and it's also a section of the room. And they're in the bad countryside. 2 landscapes, one where villages are burning, soldiers are coming, there is a raping going on, there is all kind of terrible stuff going on, and there is a landscape in which the 4 seasons are united in one depiction. So sowing, taking care, leaving it fallow, and harvesting. There's one more, but I don't have it now. This was how it was shown that was how it was shown in is it back? In Venice? Yeah. So here you see, so they are quite big, and they are printed on a very matte paper, on a Japanese rice paper, which we developed for this exhibition. And they almost look like copies. It's almost like your eye is tricked to thinking that you're looking at a piece of fresco. In that sense, it has also no relation to photography anymore. It's not anymore, my photography friends would say, not sure if this is still photography, which I found a very interesting, I found it an interesting idea that I could be not a photographer while I was still photographing. Here you see the 4 in a row, and there's a little booklet or a leporello that is made after the exhibition, which is like that. And then there's a booklet in which you have details of the works. I will do one more, and then we can start a small discussion. So when I did this, it was maybe a little bit well, it was a surprise to me how it worked. That I could go to a place that is famous, that has its own story, that everyone knows, and you can still make a new work. You can still make a new way of seeing that place. Then I was invited to make an exhibition in Vitra, and the exhibition was, they asked me to make a show on image and architecture, or photography and architecture. No, image and architecture, right? Because I kept the title in the end. And we were talking, and then halfway the conversation changed and said, the curator said, yeah, but how do you exhibit architecture photography? And I said, no, we did not agree to make a show on architecture photography. We agreed to make a show on image and architecture. And these two things have, in my view, are very separate. And then she said, okay, perfect, propose me an exhibition. So I did, and in the end, I started to go to places in which you could say the image of architecture is embedded in the architecture, or photographs of architecture that I appropriate, or buildings that are not really buildings, but more ideas of buildings. And those I would photograph in a one-to-one fashion. Here is the Studio del Duca in Urbino. It's a perfect intarsia. It was a kind of a private room for the Duke. And now I hope that it works. Yeah. So here we have it now. So I make these clumsy videos so you understand what it is. So, and then you see that you're actually in the exhibition. You're not in the space, but you're in the exhibition. So this exhibition has, 10 works that are all in different stages of, let's say, in different moments in time, but all deal with this idea of images that are part of architecture. So that are not about architecture, no, that are embedded in architecture, and materials in which you can do that. So in a kind of mosaic, in a tapestry, in a wood intarsia, in a stone. So here we have it again, and then you go close. When the image was in the exhibition, the art handlers, they were very scared. They thought they broke the picture, but it's of course part of the picture. So here you see, it's a small show, it's not big. Huh? Here you see the plan of the show. It was designed by Office Kirsten Geers, David van Severen, since we work together a lot. And I will show you, so this is testing how it should look. This is a second work, the Cappella del Perdone, or the Chapel of Forgiveness. It's also in Urbino. It's a model of a chapel in the form of a small, it's a small chapel for one person, almost as a model of a cathedral. And then I blew it up 3 times again. So you have first they made a model out of it, and then I enlarge it again. All the marble that you see is kind of invented. So it's real stone, but it's an inlay composition. And we do once again. And when you're in the exhibition, if you're close enough to these works, somehow they come alive. They are copies. You can imagine you are there. Then we go to a second work, to a third work. This is a tapestry of Bramantino, April. And it's a part of that. I think I can move. Yeah. There it is, and it's justice, which is turning into trees. It has leaves, and it's a compasses already turning into trees. The sun is angry, and somehow this also told me somehow it's also a contemporary kind of allegory of our time. Somehow it's forecasted. So if you go closer and closer, and you come to the very close grain. Now you see me here photographing it, so you see how big it is. So you also understand that I choose what I want to show. I don't show the whole thing. I don't deal with the narrative that exists. I deal with my narrative. I take off history, so I take off the yellow I take the patina out to somehow make it possible that you can look again or anew. Now this one was particularly interesting because I had a problem that I could not go close enough, and the detail was not enough somehow, because this copy needs a lot of detail, and my file was not working. And with the person with who I work, he's a kind of a, well, computer nerd. We were trying to figure out how much pixels I needed. And then he was explaining that for each thread, he needs 2 pixels in the top to make the highlight. He needs 2 pixels in the middle to make the color, and he needs 2 pixels in the bottom for the thread to make the shadow, because with 1 it stays flat. And then he calculated how much data I would need, and I had to go back to the same spot. I had to go back to the same spot. So this is the second time. And since I was not allowed to take a ladder or anything, and I had to come closer, I had to borrow from all the supposts. I had to borrow their chairs and put the tripod on, and I put my thing on. And that was just enough to get close enough to get the amount of pixels in the end that we needed. I don't like all this technicality, but if you start with a project like this, you cannot stop anymore. You have to take the consequences. You have to say, okay, I want this. I don't like the technicalities, but I have to go through with it, and I have to figure out how to do it. Then there are 3 works in the exhibition which are key, you could say, key moments in the relation of photography and architecture, which I also appropriate. So this is a picture of the scaffolding of Crystal Palace in London. Not the first Crystal Palace, because the first Crystal Palace, then photography did not exist yet. Daguerreotype existed, but not yet photography that could be redone. And this is arguably from an album that is, let's say, arguably the first architectural photography assignment. It's like 30 pictures of the construction of the Crystal Palace by Delamotte. And this is at the CCA in Montreal. I decided to rent a zoom lens and try to see, can I appropriate this? Now I did the other appropriations. Can I turn this into something new? This in the end, so we have this work, and in the end, this is how it looks in the exhibition. So I blew up the picture, well, the reproduction, to the size that it's almost a one-to-one copy of the real structure. But the real structure, of course, you cannot see, because if you go closer, what you actually see is the material on which the picture is printed. So you see here, this is the paper. It was very strange in the exhibition. You could, from far away, you could understand it, and from closer by, the picture disappeared, and you only saw you thought it was printed on a kind of tapestry until you would touch it, and then it was completely flat. It takes endless testing, because you have to test everything one-to-one. You cannot test in a small print. Everything has to be tested one-to-one. See, another round of testing. Then there is a gargoyle, anonymous cyanotype. And cyanotype was invented around the time that the gargoyles were put on the Notre Dame. You can also see there is not yet anything missing from the gargoyles. If you go there now, they have almost no horns anymore, and because of the kind of aging. So here you see me photographing it. and then you go closer and closer. And this would happen. This is what would happen in the exhibition. Like, why is it not flat, or how flat is it? And the last picture from that small section is a picture of Ilse Bing of New York, which I liked very much because it's almost like two towers of Babel that are coming together, and the materiality is almost like a gravestone, like an engraved piece of marble. Then there are the last two pictures are architectural pictures, or pictures of architecture. So here we have Rietveld House. It's a sliding door that normally goes like that. And apparently he did not like this detail. He was very upset about that. There was no other way to make that detail. But this I liked because you can understand that the Rietveld House is not architecture yet. It's a model, it's a test, it's a one-to-one sculpted object. It's full of ideas, but it's not really architecture. You cannot just repeat it. So to me, this was close to an image. That's why it could fit in the architecture and image show. So image and architecture. And the last one is a detail from the Venturi house, mother's house of Venturi, which if you see it in reality has the same quality. It's a bit clumsy. It's very iconic, but a bit clumsily made and almost on purpose, I would say. How this piece of wood is just glued over everything, doesn't even fit there. It doesn't matter, no? It's supposed to become a little book, but didn't happen yet, like many books. And then we can stop here for the moment and we can start discussion, and then there is one or two more later.
Thank you, Bas, for this first chapter of the presentation of today. So maybe I go and ask the first question. You started your presentation with photography of your own studio in Rotterdam, talking about the size of the images, kind of to a certain extent the physicality of the image. And now we finished this first chapter of the presentation, with the Vitra show, and with insights about the details of the paper, the size, the quality of printing, the number of pixels, etc. I know you put a lot of, detail into how your photography is printed and published. Like the books are beautifully edited also, like they are beautiful objects in themselves. However, we saw your presentation today in a TV screen, and we know that probably more than 90% of the people who know your work across the world at first look at it through screens. And the more the images are circulated, the more they can somehow be informally or collectively edited. You know, sometimes they lose quality. Maybe people crop them. Maybe people use them in collages. Maybe people Photoshop them. So this is an endless process of kind of editing and appropriating your work through screens across the world. And for me, it's very interesting to understand whether this frustrates you or whether this kind of provides you insights about how your work is understood by society at large.
Well, no, there are, let's say, two things. One thing I didn't tell, which can answer one of these questions. When I started to do these works, that's the moment when I shifted from analog to digital. And I had to figure out, what can a digital camera do? Is it different than analog camera? And I decided, yes, very different. And I want to cut everything I did and I want to restart somehow. Why? Because I was not comfortable anymore with the fact that we see every image via a screen. that size is irrelevant, so that images are judged on what's on it. So on the narrative that you can read, and the narrative you can read in a poster like that, but also in a thing like that. It doesn't matter. If you can see what it shows, then most people have seen the image. But I think for photographers, this is not enough. There has to be an encounter of the work, because there is a lot more than the narrative, hopefully. Let's say this you could call the photographic aspect. So I decided what could be the most radical way to deal with this. I said, okay, I want to make works in which you physically relate to the work. So it has to have the size of a human. It has to have the size that you could stand in front and you are the same size as the picture, more or less. Then I wanted to get rid of the shine. So I did not want glass, and I did not want shiny paper, because this is now how we see every image. We see every image on our phone, on our screen, and it's shiny and glass. And it's not that it's not good, because before we were not used to seeing pictures behind glass, and therefore they had a certain presence. But now this is our reality, and this means that I have to be not counter, but I have to understand this, that I have to make a work which you can relate to when you see it in reality. And that probably means it should not have glass, and it should be tactile. It should be anti-photograph. It should not be possible to understand it if you take an iPhone picture of it and you show it to your friend and say, this is fantastic. And he says, yeah, but I just see a picture of a photo. I just see a picture of a piece of the Rietveld house. I mean, I've seen this house before, but that's exactly the point. It's not about the fact that you can show it to someone else. It's not reproducible. So if someone takes a cut out of my picture, yeah, it's like they cut a piece of the Rietveld house. It's completely the same as what I did, no? Somehow. I hope it's a...
Bas, well, I'm fascinated of your work, but and I think that I will ask several questions about related to your work. But then now I would like just to ask about a statement that you said today, and somehow you mentioned it yesterday or the day before, related about the city. You said something like it's not needed anymore to take pictures of the city because they could take care about themselves. What do you mean about cities, or what do you mean that cities need photos to protect themselves? What was the idea?
I think that for a long time, photography served either as pure information. So you would see a photo from another city. So, for instance, I mean, maybe the easiest way is to say the photographs of the new American West, how it was built. This gave information to Europe how cities were progressing in another spot. It could be copied. It's great. We should also do like this. New York, it has even bigger skyscrapers. That we also need to have this. No, kind of an endless competition through showing possibilities of the city. I think we have reached the moment, and I think this already mentally happened to me when I was photographing Cairo and Dubai, that I thought, but should I still promote this kind of growth? Because, I mean, I cannot be critical because it will anyway grow. You know, if we look at photographs of globalization by Gursky, for instance, it's a kind of a exploded view of how incredible everything has grown. As a critique, it's a photo as a critique. But 3 years later, it's not anymore a critique, it's reality. And the photograph becomes something else. So I somehow decided maybe it's not necessary anymore to photograph, because the city will take care of its own progress. I think the role for photography shifting, or at least in my case, shifting to other points into more fragile points. So I decided to photograph pure nature, which is not in this selection, and artifacts. Artifacts, because I think we sometimes think everything is protected and everything will stay forever. But we know that a lot of these artifacts, well, they might disappear. There might be things happening to them that we can't see them anymore. You know, we already cannot go anymore to certain places in the world to see these things. So I'm interested in the kind of I started to be interested in the old-fashioned idea of photography that is documenting and is taking care somehow. No? Almost a kind of a Becher way, no? Kind of a, let's photograph all the industrial plants before they are being destroyed.
Thank you. I was wondering, you show some first work when you are photographing 3D environment or physical places, and then you switch to already 2D representation. And do you see a major difference on your role as a photographer dealing with these two medium, or is it for you the same process somehow, intellectually, not on a technical level?
How to answer this? I mean, a photograph is by default always 2D. So whether the starting point is 2D or whether starting point is 3D is in essence should not be misunderstood, that the photograph is a representation of a 3D space. It's maybe a bit a cryptic answer, but I can maybe explain it through one example. There is a work by a famous Italian photographer called Luigi Ghiri, which is called Atlante. It's a book of photographs of him photographing Atlas. So you just see kind of written words like desert, ocean, you see some pictograms of a palm tree, you see a kind of, and then in the text that is in this book, he's explaining that mentally, he says, a picture of the ocean brings us to imagine the ocean. But the picture of the atlas with the word ocean brings us to exactly the same place, to the imaginary ocean. So what is the difference between the picture of the ocean, if it mentally, and the picture of the atlas where it says ocean, when it brings us to the same spot? No? So in that sense, I would say the 2D space and the 3D space, if I'm very intellectual, I would say there cannot be, in the end result, if the end result is a photograph, we should not talk about the difference, because it cannot represent the 3D space.
One more question, and we keep going to the next step. No questions, no comments.
There are no questions from the audience. I will jump with a
sorry, maybe
question.
it's a bit too difficult, the kind of a conversation.
No, but I think that this answer is very relevant, and we already discussed and it's published that in the beginning of your career you used to have these notebooks in which you collected like images. Mm-hmm. And for me, the question by Damien and your reply is very relevant, because I would like to understand how you prepare like your trips and your work now, how you anticipate kind of mentally, or how you decide not to anticipate mentally, like the images of the places you are gonna visit. Like for example, now these days we are working on Barragan's architecture, which is very well known through images, and of course you have fabricated images in your mind. So how do you anticipate your work before arriving to the physical places?
Well, I work, strangely enough, quite intuitive. So I go to places that I think have potential, so that are potentially rich for the things that I'm interested in. I don't research very deep into these places because I don't want to have the preoccupied view. I don't want to know too much. And then on the spot, I will decide to take a picture when I'm recognizing something. This is not something that I have read or about that particular space. It's recognizing a certain, well, yeah, you recognize something in something else. And that's the moment when I start photographing. And that might not be the final picture, but that's the moment when I start photographing. And then there are, of course, certain types of images that I have made. So I know the technique, how to do, and I know the end result. Because the thing is also that when you're in a space, you are surrounded by context. And this context is in your mind. So it's part of how you look. But the camera will never have that context. So the final result, the final image can never incorporate what is not on the image. So it is not always clear, even after so many years, that if I take a picture, if it's going to be the right one, because it might be that I'm still too much in the space itself. And when I see the picture in another context, so in my studio, then all of a sudden it might not work anymore because you need the rest of the space or the rest of the context to be present. So I make multiple tests in spaces that I find interesting, and sometimes the one that I thought was not working in the spot is actually the one which can survive without the context. Maybe that's the best way to explain. Okay? It's very strange to now have to go back to the... second part. Can we go back to the lecture? So potteries. Yeah, I put a couple of works behind each other that could deal with this idea of appropriation of architecture in different ways. Potteries is potteries in belt. I hope some of you know what the project is. It's a project by Cedric Price. You see here Cedric Price. Cedric Price is a kind of a very interesting English architect from the 60s who has not built a lot, but has made incredible amount of projects which have incredible amount of influence on lots of architects. Potteries is a project which, when I was still studying architecture and we had to do a project on a former industrial site and we had to revitalize it, something like this, and everyone would always say, we have to look at Pottery Stingveld. This is the key project. And Pottery Stingveld is a kind of a big urban site. It's a wasteland of pottery, so how to make pottery. And let me see. So this is the map. This is the airport, the rail line through it. And he proposed I mean, for a long time, I did not even know it was a real project, that it was a project on a real site, on a site that really existed. But there are reasons why I was interested in it. So this is the start of his project. These are site photographs and his kind of a funny sentences. The change of air suits me well at Stoke-on-Trent. So Stoke-on-Trent is where the potteries is. Stoke-on-Trent, always merry and bright, you know, yes, fine. When stokes, when pottery spot, no, very, and he's also English, a bit cynical, a bit funny, no? Side photographs. This is also a side photograph of his office. It's almost a kind of a Becher-like landscape, a very industrial, finished landscape. These are the drawings he would make for the revitalization of the site, which he imagined that revitalizing the site could only be done by making a mobile university. Mobile university means you as students would live in a tower on the end of the site. When you would go to school, you would get into a train wagon. The train wagon would be lifted in the air and put on rails, and the whole day you would be driven around, and in the evening you would come back to your site. There are 3 of these sites that he designed. So this is the kind of a schematic design, I guess. And then there are these very beautiful, so here are living quarters for the students. Here it would take the school on the train and we go. But these are very beautiful. These are photographs with a celluloid over it on which the future is sketched somehow. And I was always fascinated by this aspect. And then I went to research and I understood that this is a so-called Mendeley transfer site, or the proposed Mendeley transfer site. There are 3 transfer sites, meaning that's the places where students were living. And it's a very futuristic, so there's a lot of drawings of kind of Jetsons-like things. So I was invited to make a work for an exhibition. The exhibition was on Cedric Price, and the curator asked me, can you photograph a work of Cedric Price? And this is a bit a nasty question because he only built one structure. He built the aviary, so a kind of a big birdhouse in the zoo in London. And then I thought, I don't want to photograph this object. I'm interested in this project that I've heard all about all my life. Maybe I do something with this. I don't know what, but let's see. So I started to research, and I figured out that the place really exists. And I could locate the spot where, let's say, this industrial waste site was. And the project was never finished, was never done. And I went there, and then I photographed the site, and that was going to be my work. So I said, okay, look, in the exhibition there will be photographs of the site, just to prove that the site exists, just to prove that the project was a real project, and just to see what happened. So this is what I found. We started Mendeley transfer site, and we are on the rail line, and the industrial site that needed to be revitalized by architecture, by planning, by new industry, became, something equally interesting, and something of which probably Cedric Price would have said, this would also be fun, no? In the end. In the end, we see here how the show was exhibited. Then, as a final act, so there's also supposed to be a book of this. It's finished, the book, but no publisher. So no publisher, no money, then there is no book, but the design is finished. The design would be the site changed, so put on the site as if there's 2 eyes looking at you, as a kind of a natural site with 2 eyes. And then to finish the project, I decided to go and visit the CCA, which I did not visit them. I became friends with them when I went to CCA to photograph the actual collage which he made, because I said, now I have proven somehow that the site exists. Now I also want to photograph and prove to myself that the image is not a fake image, that it's not a kind of invented history. I want to hold the collage in my hand, and I want to photograph it as an object. So not anymore that it lives on the internet as an image, but that it's an object that has a reality. Then we made a small work out of it later. So I appropriated again my own work. No? Shall I do one more? Then we sit down again. So this is not about architecture, but this is about art. So I thought I now appropriated this and that, but can I do it even more in an area that I'm even more unsure about. I was invited together with Office because we work a lot together and we make kind of pavilions together in which image is always the most important element that is making a space. They are the architects of the space and I'm providing the images, and we try to make objects that are only image, but if you're inside of that, it's also architecture. And we were invited to an outside art shoot, which was loosely around Bruegel, the painter, because Bruegel painted once in his life a landscape around that area, and they wanted to commemorate that. And I realized that in Rotterdam, in the Boijmans van Beuningen, which is our contemporary art museum or our art museum, there is the painting Tower of Babel by Bruegel. And I knew that because I went, every time I would go to the museum, I would just go visit it. It's a very small painting, of course, very famous, like this. And can I use that? Even am I allowed to photograph this? So I had to go through the whole process of asking the people from the museum, could I photograph this for this exhibition? It was very complicated, but in the end they allowed me. So here's my rented camera. There is the painting, so you can see it's not so big. And there's a person standing next to me who is the personal caretaker of the painting. So she goes, if the painting travels, she goes with the painting for the durance of the exhibition. No, she will be in the space always. So she stands next to me and says, okay, you can move the camera. Okay, now you can take the picture. Okay, fine, no problem. Now is this, now is that. Of course, the glass could not be taken off. I could not bring light. There could not flash. There was a whole list of things that I could not do. But I was allowed to go very close. And the painting is really, really perfectly made. So I started to go, so I thought, how close can I go? So I figured out I can go to like 4 by 3 centimeters. I can photograph pieces of 4 by 3 centimeters. And then I went, so this is the painting, and then I went to the painting as if I'm walking in a landscape, or as if I'm walking in a city. No? Can I go through the painting like that? And I figured out you can. So in the left side of the painting, there are people clearing the forest. They are cutting down the trees. So it has nothing to do with the tower that's being built. It's like the first cutting of the forest. Then there are kilns where you fire bricks are being constructed. More kilns in the landscape. It's probably hard to see. And then he starts to paint the construction of the tower, and he paints the bricks in exactly the same way as he paints the leaves, but just in another color. They are exactly the same. And it's a kind of also mental moment where somehow I have the feeling he says, okay, you know, the one turns into the other. Here you see it a bit better. Then material is arriving. There's still a kind of rural elements. A bigger kiln is being built. The island that is in the distance is all trees are being chopped down. It's becoming an empty wasteland. So it's a kind of how we treat also our environment is already in this painting in small elements. So we destroy everything in order to build something big. There's a harbor where everything comes in. So I started to photograph the whole painting in that way. So can you make a story, or can you show it in a way that it's not anymore an object, but it's almost a kind of a story of construction and a story of destruction. Then we made a proposal together with Jason and David to place a big circle in a forest on the side, on the route that we were supposed to make something. The circle is 35 meters in diameter. It would be in the forest, And the pictures are going to be printed on canvas that is just hanging. Of course, we had to test this, so we were testing a big canvas print. What happens then? We also realized very quickly, if you make a circle in the forest, you make trouble for yourself. You have to measure every tree in the forest before you can put your perfect circle in it. Then I made a possible line, how the works could be. And then here, I think it's installed, so you can understand a little bit the scale. Of course, you could not be on this position. I was on a ladder at this moment because we were not yet ready. And you see already that inside of the circle, if you're inside of the circle, you almost cannot see the pictures. So you have to move. You have to go through. This is your new encounter with the painting.
How many times do you use that?
50 times. And you know that since I live in Switzerland they put sticks. I don't know if you know, but in new buildings being erected, they first put sticks where the building will be. So in my understanding, the sticks that were of the circle were always a kind of a hidden announcement of something that could come. You know, like the Tower of Babel is a round object. You know? And outside, it's silver. So if you would arrive to the forest, it would be an object. And if you go through the circle, the object disappears and you're encountered with the story of the painting, but also with the site. And the site is then a new place to be. I think there are one or two kind of, so you have a bit of understanding how it feels to go through. I think this is also the end of part 2. You know, very clumsy movies, huh? But you at least have the idea of how it is to go through that space. And then you go outside and you see the object. Because of course it still has to be kind of architecture. I will just let it run, and then we can start round 2. Probably even confuses more than before.
So this is a temporary
Yes.
exhibition.
Yeah, it was half a year standing there. Yep.
That's fascinating, this project.
Like that installation, was it like in a park or a forest, or where?
This one?
Yeah.
It was in the forest.
And why did you choose to put it there and not like in a public space, like in the city or something
Well,
like that?
it is a public space somehow. The forest it's a public forest, so you can walk there without that you have to ask for permission. There are people walking there, driving their bike, coming past it. But I somehow had the feeling that that the images needed the counter. They could not be just in a circle. You have to have how to explain? I think this relation with nature was extremely important in this work, because the Tower of Babel is about the destruction of it, no? About how we build things that are beyond our imagination, but are also immediately destroying the environment which we want to be in. So for me, it was important that we put it not in the city, but put it in a kind of natural environment.
Thank you.
So I'm curious on how important it is to you when embarking on a new project, the viewer experience of whoever sees your work, and if you're comfortable losing control of how people look at your work. I know you said you're happy with people understanding the narrative if it's a small picture or a big picture, but how much do you play? How many?
No, the answer is very simple. The moment it leaves the studio, it's not anymore only mine. So the moment I've decided it's finished, it means everyone has an opinion about it and can do with it what they want, and they can put a context on it which they want. If I'm asked as a personal author to put it in a museum, I do it how I think it should be. But if you think the picture is useful for you and you appropriate it, yeah, that's the reality of putting a work out. And I think that's also the interesting part. At the moment when I decide it's finished and it goes into the world, yeah, that's also the moment when I can start to learn what this image means. So,
thank you.
Just a question. The chronology, the project you just showed, it was after the project you did for Vitra, right?
I think Potteries was first. No, yeah, Potteries was first. Then was Venice. Then was Vitra, and the last one. This was the last one. But there was one more after. But this in this chronology, this is the last one.
So this is the first project you started actually photographing through glass.
Yes.
And would you consider pushing photographing glass further?
Yes, it's a question how to do that.
It's just what you were discussing with the pictures on the phone, if you would push it further to taking pictures of numeric...
No, but it is actually true that I am already looking for a long time to photograph something that is transparent, and I'm not in this series of let's say kind of a relation with architecture. But I have not found. I've tried a couple of times, but I have not found yet the subject with which it works, or with which I'm happy that it's not only a representation of the thing that exists, but that it also becomes photographically interesting, without that it becomes abstract completely.
Okay.
But I am also curious how abstract this is all to you, because it's a kind of quite.
It's also quite a technical question. You mentioned that you helped develop a kind of paper that you used to print. What was the process and how you develop a specific type of paper for your?
No.
Develop the paper, but we develop how we use it. So the paper is a paper by Hanover. It's a rice paper. But we have developed the way how we have to deal with the file and with the printing and the ink, how to keep it, how to achieve this almost a copy version without that the picture is without that the picture is fragile. So a lot of papers, photographic papers that are not, if you touch it, you see immediately that you have touched it. And this we didn't want. So we wanted a material that, well, if someone illegally kind of strokes the picture, which happens, that nothing, that is fine. And this took quite a bit of time to do that. And also the way how it's mounted is very specific and it's very difficult. And at the moment, person who is doing it, he can't do it anymore, so I have to find and train someone new. So it's in a way really crafted object in the end.
I have a question. How do you choose subjects? Because you are choosing one of the most famous pieces of art. It's everybody's seen, like, of course, I understand what the importance of the architecture, but is the point the fact that they are so well known, or you're trying to make a sense way, or is there?
Yeah, with these types of works, with these almost copies, there is a necessity that the work is known. Because if you copy something that is not known, somehow the whole idea of that copying is gone. And then also you cannot recognize it, and if you cannot recognize it, you also cannot see it somehow. But I have been trying. Can I do it with, for instance, I've been thinking, can I do kind of an anonymous graffiti or things like this? But it's not, then it becomes, then you just look at the surface in the end and all meaning disappears. It's still nice as an object, but somehow it's not the same. So it's an interesting question, and it's a question I'm struggling with, or I'm working with. But I think there has to be a certain importance of the thing that you re-photograph.
So it's kind of like it's not actually the same as anti-Warhol's icons or like the canvas. Like I'm not comparing it. This was a little bit the same idea, like taking something that's so well known, showing it to people. And I don't know why it just makes it extra. I'm not sure if you agree that it's the fact that these things are known and
yeah, it's nice to hear that you think about Warhol when you look at my pictures. No, but it's also good that you think, no, but that's the process that goes on. If you look at the art, you try to understand to what can I relate this, in which category does this belong, or where should I place it, how should I see this? These are all important questions that seemingly work, so that's good.
We can have a couple of questions more.
For me, I'm very fascinated, like in the evolution of your work. There is a progressive
Obsession with the physicality of images. So it's 2D, but it's physical at the same time. So it's not fully 2D. So there are the tapestries. It's very clear that they have depth. They have kind of a sort of micro-scale topography embedded into it. Then there is the painting, like you talk with a lot of detail about the oil on canvas, but it has it's a bas relief somehow. And then you put a lot of effort in how you display like these photographs, no? Like the more 2D you go in, the things you look at, the more effort you put into how these things are kind of scenographed, you know? Like it's kind of an inverted relationship between 2D and 3D. But for me, what is very kind of default, so to say, is that still you are looking at these either photographs or tapestries or paintings with a 90 degrees perpendicular angle. Like the camera is always like looking at it. So you are not pivoting the camera in the same way you pivot the camera when you go to landscapes or to cities, no? Like you really display. And for me, this is kind of a bit default, but also interesting. And I would like to know if you ever consider like looking at potentially 2D images, like pivoting the camera and with a certain kind of sense of diagonality within the image. But they are. But you pivot the camera, like, really? In the pictures we saw? And what is the degree of, not very much, but it's as much as I would do when I'm photographing an object. I never.
pienso que la discusión entre una escuela técnica y una escuela creativa es lo que hace distintiva a CENTRO.
Es una institución que genera pasión y de la que se apasiona uno. Me parece que es fundamental introducirse en una comunidad que va a sacar lo mejor de ustedes y que ustedes pueden sacar lo mejor de esa gran comunidad. Es la única escuela en la que se van a estar discutiendo temas y problemas que hoy en día otras escuelas no están pensando. Quizás ustedes sean la primera generación en la que transformen más de lo que construyen, que reciclen más de lo que hacen. Y eso requiere otro marco conceptual, otras herramientas, y esta es la escuela donde lo estamos viendo.